Welcome to Conspiracy Tapes, the podcast that dares to pull back the velvet curtain on one of music history's most shocking and controversial deaths. I'm your host, and today we're diving deep into the untold story of Elvis Presley's final days, his mysterious death, and the explosive secrets that followed. This is Ryan Martin, and let's dive deeper into what really happened behind the gates of Graceland on August 16, 1977. Why was Elvis's autopsy shrouded in secrecy? And could the king of rock and roll have faked his own death? Buckle up, because this isn't the sanitized version you've heard before. This is the raw, unfiltered truth about Elvis Presley's final chapter. Let's begin our investigation 6 days before one of Elvis's most critical health scares, a moment that should have been a wake-up call, but instead became another chapter in his tragic descent. Picture this: Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, gasping for breath on a private plane somewhere over America. He's returning from California, but this isn't a triumphant homecoming. Linda, his companion, watches in horror as his breathing deteriorates despite a constant supply of oxygen. The man who once moved millions with his voice can barely draw breath. When they finally reached Memphis, Dr. George Nicopolis, you'll know him as the infamous doctor. Nick arrived at Graceland expecting to find Elvis recovering from a minor ailment. Instead, he discovered a man so swollen with fluid that he was nearly unrecognizable. Elvis was severely edematous, his body retaining water to such an extreme degree that he could barely breathe. Dr. Nick tried desperately to treat Elvis at home, even stationing his office nurse, Tish Henley, at Graceland for round-the-clock monitoring. But 3 days later, Elvis's condition took a terrifying turn. His breathing became what doctors call stertorous, noisy, labored, the sound of a man fighting for every breath. At Baptist Memorial Hospital in Memphis, a team of specialists assembled to save the king's life. They ruled out congestive heart failure and began investigating the possibility of a severe drug reaction, possibly from steroids. But when Elvis was coherent enough to speak, his medication history didn't explain his Cushingoid appearance, that telltale swelling and distinctive physical changes caused by excess steroids. Then an observant doctor noticed something disturbing. Elvis's skin was covered in black and blue marks. When questioned, Elvis casually attributed these bruises to acupuncture treatments he'd been receiving for months. But as the medical team probed deeper, Elvis revealed something that changed everything. This wasn't traditional acupuncture with simple needles. Syringes were involved. What was in those syringes? Elvis claimed uncertainty, saying he'd been told it was just local anesthetic and perhaps some cortisone for recovery. But Dr. Nick wasn't buying it. He privately consulted Joe Esposito, Elvis's longtime associate, who hinted at something far more sinister. These injections weren't decreasing, they were becoming more frequent. Determined to uncover the truth, Doctor, Nick contacted the physician in California responsible for these mysterious treatments. After confronting him about Elvis's critical condition, the grim truth emerged. Elvis was receiving daily injections of Demerol, a potent opioid analgesic. But here's the most shocking part. Elvis wasn't an unwitting victim. He was fully aware of what Demerol was and had become a zealous advocate for its supposed miraculous healing properties. He was even financing the physician's trips to administer the drug to his friends and acquaintances. The king of rock and roll had become the king of denial, funding his own destruction while spreading the addiction to others. Dr. Nick faced the heartbreaking reality. Elvis Presley, the man who had revolutionized American music, was battling a serious addiction problem. This wasn't just about pills anymore. This was about daily injections of one of the most addictive painkillers available. Despite this revelation about Elvis's Demerol addiction, Dr. Nick didn't abandon his most famous patient. Instead, he embarked on what would become a tragic final chapter of intervention, friendship, and ultimately helplessness. Dr. Nick had developed a routine of running drug screens on Elvis, and for a while, things seemed promising. Each test returned negative, and Elvis appeared to be in a more positive state of mind. But on February 13th, the day Elvis was scheduled to be discharged from the hospital, traces of unprescribed barbiturates appeared in his urine. This should have been a red flag moment. This should have been an intervention. Instead, Dr. Nick chose not to confront Elvis directly. Why? Perhaps he sensed what those closest to Elvis already knew. The king was spiraling into a deep depression, and direct confrontation might push him over the edge. Dr. Nick's approach was subtle but comprehensive. He prescribed Elavil for what he suspected was deepening depression and established a daily monitoring system. Either he or his office nurse, Tish Henley, would visit Graceland every single day to oversee Elvis's medication intake. It was an unprecedented level of medical supervision for a patient, but then again, Elvis Presley was no ordinary patient. The colonel had organized a recording session for March 10th, just 8 days before Elvis was scheduled to perform in Las Vegas, but Elvis insisted on staying in Memphis longer, claiming he needed to regain physical strength and lose weight. The real reason might have been more emotional. His father Vernon was still hospitalized, and Elvis couldn't bear to leave him. Dr. Nick found himself getting pulled deeper into Elvis's world despite warnings from friends and family about the potential risks. Even Father Vieron, his family priest, advised him to distance himself from Elvis, cautioning that this connection was an injustice to himself, his medical practice, and his family. But Dr. Nick was captivated by Elvis's charismatic allure and remained committed to what he believed was a rescue mission. The doctor tried everything. He put Elvis on a low-carbohydrate diet and encouraged him to play racquetball, a sport in which Dr. Nick excelled. They played first at the YMCA, then later at Memphis State during late-night hours. These sessions often extended until the early morning hours, after which Dr. Nick would head to work just a few hours later, exhausted but determined. But what was driving this obsession? Dr. Nick probably couldn't pinpoint exactly why he devoted so much time and effort, but it was obvious to everyone close to Elvis that there existed a profound emotional void in the singer's life. The man who had everything, fame, fortune, adoration, was desperately lonely. During this period, Elvis found different ways to cope with his isolation. He would watch old Monty Python episodes with Linda and Billy, memorizing entire episodes and sparking laughter with exchanged quotes until tears streamed from their eyes. Other times, he became contemplative about his past, engaging Dr. Nick in deep discussions about topics ranging from medicine to philosophy. Elvis also spent significant time with longtime RCA promotional man Bill Browder, known by his stage name T.G. Shepherd, after his recent success with the #1 country hit. Their friendship deepened beyond professional boundaries as they bonded over shared experiences of fame and its pressures. Whenever Browder returned from a road trip, Elvis, having experienced the crushing pressures of fame decades earlier, was particularly empathetic. They often spent evenings watching the 10 o'clock news, with Elvis occasionally parroting the newscaster before. Browder realized Elvis had already seen the broadcast at 6, a small detail that spoke to Elvis's desperate need for human connection and routine. Their conversations frequently touched on marriage, with Elvis poignantly advising Browder and his wife to never separate. These weren't casual remarks. They were the reflections of a man who understood loss intimately, hinting at his own longing for genuine personal connection. Elvis would recount an emotionally significant moment from his childhood in Tupelo when he felt spiritually renewed, even donating his cherished comic books during this period of enlightenment. Yet, despite these sparks of joy and spiritual connection, he remained deeply lonely, feeling isolated by his fame and burdened by the realization that his millions of admirers didn't truly know him or love him as a person. They loved the image, the myth, the performance. What Dr. Nick was witnessing in these final months wasn't just addiction or depression. It was a man grappling with the existential crisis of celebrity, the burden of being loved by millions who would never truly know him. Now we come to the day that changed everything. August 16th, 1977. The day the king of rock and roll drew his final breath, and the day that launched 1,000 conspiracy theories. Ginger Alden arose around 1:30 in the afternoon, briefly awake before deciding to return to sleep for a few extra moments. When she finally mustered some energy, she decided to call her mother. The conversation instantly turned to Elvis, a routine check-in that would prove to be anything but routine. Her mother inquired about how Elvis was doing, and Ginger confessed she hadn't seen him yet that day. This was unusual. Elvis hadn't returned to bed, which raised both her curiosity and concern. After freshening up, washing her face, and putting on makeup in her bathroom, Ginger resolved to check on him. What happened next would be seared into her memory forever. Ginger made her way to Elvis's bathroom door and knocked a few times. Silence. With no response to her knocks, she gingerly opened the door and was met with an appalling sight that would haunt her for the rest of her life. Elvis lay lifeless on the floor, his gold pajama bottoms gathered around his ankles, his face submerged in a pool of his own vomit that stained the thick, shaggy carpet beneath him. The king of rock and roll, the man who had gyrated his hips and set the world on fire, was reduced to this tragic, undignified scene. Overwhelmed and dazed, Ginger hurriedly called downstairs, reaching out for someone on duty. Her call was answered by the maid, who connected her with Al Strada. Through her shock and panic, she urgently informed him that something seemed terribly wrong, prompting him to rush upstairs immediately. Al Strada reached the scene first, promptly bending over to assess the situation. Joe Esposito arrived moments later, bounding up the stairs in haste. Together, they managed to turn Elvis's body over, and Joe attempted mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, desperately trying to breathe life back into the king. Time seemed suspended as the reality of the situation began setting in. The bedroom quickly swelled with people, and within moments, Vernon Presley appeared with Patsy Presley by his side. The look of sheer terror on Vernon's face was heartbreaking as he pleaded desperately, "Oh God, son, please don't go. Please don't die." Joe labored relentlessly over Elvis's body, but it was evident to him and everyone else that fate had already taken its course. Elvis's face had turned swollen and purplish. His tongue had darkened and protruded grotesquely from his mouth, and his eyes were bloodshot. These weren't the features of the man who had once been considered the most handsome performer in the world. Unbeknownst to the adults frantically trying to save Elvis, 9-year-old Lisa Marie Presley had arrived amid the turmoil. She demanded to know, "What's wrong with my daddy?" as Ginger discreetly tried to close the bathroom door behind her. But Lisa, filled with the defiance and determination that she had inherited from her father, declared, "Something's wrong with my daddy, and I'm going to find out." She ran around trying to gain entry through other doors until they were quickly locked. The scene descended into chaos, waves of wailing and screaming, when 2 emergency medical personnel from the Whitehaven Fire Department arrived in an ambulance. Their arrival uncovered what they would later describe as resembling carnage. A crowd of about a dozen people encircled the barely recognizable body, beseeching the attendants to intervene. asking desperately if there was anything they could do. All strata stood out amid the chaos, sporting gold-rimmed designer sunglasses and wearing a football jersey emblazoned with Hawaii 75. In a moment that would later fuel conspiracy theories, he speculated to the EMTs that Elvis had overdosed, a theory that was being echoed by fans gathered at the gates before they even realized who the victim was. Without any vital signs, the outcome was already determined. The attendants placed Elvis onto a stretcher with help from Al, Joe, and Charlie, carrying him through the front door to the waiting ambulance. Vernon, desperate to accompany his son, was lovingly but firmly restrained. With anguish tearing through his voice, he called out words that would echo through rock and roll history. "I'm coming, son. I'll be there." And just like that, at 3:30 p.m. on August 16, 1977, Elvis Aaron Presley was declared dead at Baptist Memorial Hospital. He was 42 years old. The king was dead, but the mystery was just beginning. What happened immediately after Elvis's death reads like something out of a crime thriller, and perhaps that's exactly what it was. When Joe Esposito and Charlie Hodge returned to Graceland after accompanying Elvis to the hospital, they discovered that fans had already begun gathering outside the gates. But inside Graceland, something far more sinister was taking place. Under the guidance of Elvis's security team, a thorough cleanup effort was already underway in Elvis's bedroom. Everything was being sanitized. The bed was remade, the bathroom was scoured, and the space was being transformed to look as though nothing untoward had ever occurred. This wasn't grief. This was evidence tampering. Shelby County medical investigator Dan Warlick arrived shortly afterward, accompanied by Police Lieutenant Sam McCackern and Assistant District Attorney Jerry Stauffer. The first person Warlick noticed upon entering the house was Vernon Presley, speaking to someone on the phone. Vernon's composure suddenly shattered as his grief overtook him. His voice, strained with unimaginable sorrow, uttered words that would break any parent's heart. "My baby is dead. They've taken him. He's gone. My baby is dead," before succumbing to uncontrollable tears. Sam Thompson then escorted the medical investigator upstairs. After unlocking the doors to Elvis's private quarters, he led Warlick and his entourage into the study. What they found was both bizarre and telling. Teddy bears were scattered on couches, forming a complete circle around the room, all positioned to face an oversized desk. A placard reading "Elvis Presley, the Boss," dominated the desk. The walls, adorned with leather or naga hide, projected a strange blend of childish whimsy against a backdrop of stark reality. But most disturbing of all was an empty syringe that Warlick noticed near the placard, physical evidence of the injection routine that Dr. Nick had discovered months earlier. Moving past the desk into the bedroom, Warlick's attention was drawn to multiple televisions perched along a deep bookcase, all positioned to face an enormous king-size bed. On top of the bookcase lay a second syringe, identical to the first and similarly empty. Two syringes, both empty, in the private quarters of a man who had just died under mysterious circumstances. Warlick immediately ordered the area to be secured, but he was keenly aware of the futility of this gesture. The initial crime scene had already been altered by the cleanup crew. In the bathroom where Elvis had been found, Warlick observed a deep red carpet, a yellowish throw rug in front of a black toilet, and yet another television positioned to be visible from the commode. There were two telephones and something resembling an intercom mounted adjacent to the toilet paper dispenser. Comfortable armchairs were arranged strategically around the bathroom, and the room's center featured a grand 7-foot diameter circular shower with a cushy vinyl chair placed inside. But the most revealing discovery was on the vast 12-foot-long light marble counter with its built-in purple sink. Warlick found a black bag resembling a doctor's kit, complete with a front latch and large folding flap. Inside were several small black plastic drawers, all completely empty. Here's what's truly shocking. The medicine cabinet showed no signs of even basic household remedies, not just in the bedroom, but anywhere in the house. In Warlick's 4 years of experience as an investigator, this was a first. It was rare to find such a complete absence of medications in any home, except for those of the most devout Christian Scientists. Someone had systematically removed every trace of medication from Graceland. The interviews Warlick conducted throughout the afternoon revealed sanitized accounts, notably lacking in details. Apart from the empty syringes, the only clue left behind was the book Elvis had been reading in the bathroom at the time of his death. A study focusing on sex and psychic energy, linking sexual positions to astrological signs. Even in death, Elvis's reading material would become tabloid fodder. Warlick discovered a stain on the bathroom carpet, indicating where Elvis had vomited while apparently seated on the toilet. The medical investigator's assessment suggested that Elvis had either stumbled or crawled a few feet before succumbing to his condition. But the real controversy was yet to come. By the time Warlick returned to the hospital just before 7 o'clock, the autopsy proceedings were about to commence. Despite lacking any formal role in the process, Dr. Nick was present as an observer, a clear indication that this death investigation would be handled as a private matter rather than a public one. This was happening despite pressure from the Attorney General's office to relocate Elvis's body to the city hospital across the street, where a more official state-sanctioned coroner's examination could occur. Instead, 9 pathologists from Baptist Memorial Hospital, having obtained Vernon Presley's consent, took responsibility for conducting the examination. They were conscious that the world was watching, but only Elvis's father would be privy to the results. Morris Elliott, one of the hospital administrators, later explained their reasoning. Our pathologists wanted to avoid the controversies that surrounded President Kennedy's autopsy. They were determined not to let the hospital face embarrassment. But here's where the story takes a truly bizarre turn. With time pressures mounting, they had hardly completed the initial stages of the examination when Shelby County Medical Examiner Jerry Francisco Dr. Eric Muirhead, the hospital's chief of pathology, and 5 hospital doctors, along with Dr. Nick, left to attend an 8 o'clock press conference. At this press conference, Dr. Francisco prematurely announced the autopsy results even though the procedure was still ongoing. He attributed Elvis's death to cardiac arrhythmia due to undetermined heartbeat, essentially saying Elvis died of a heart condition they couldn't specifically identify. Dr. Muirhead was visibly embarrassed by the situation. He cringed as Francisco dismissed the physical evidence with a stream of cardiological jargon, but refrained from contradicting the medical examiner. "I wish I had spoken up," Muirhead confided to his colleagues afterward. At that moment, no definitive results were available to corroborate Francisco's statement. In other words, the official cause of Elvis Presley's death was announced to the world before the autopsy was even completed, based on preliminary observations rather than scientific analysis. The autopsy results, the real ones, would remain sealed and secret, fueling decades of speculation and conspiracy theories. The official story of Elvis Presley's death, cardiac arrhythmia in a bathroom at Graceland, was too mundane, too undignified for the king of rock and roll. And perhaps that's exactly why alternative theories began sprouting almost immediately, theories that persist to this day. The uncomfortable reality of Elvis's death, discovered lifeless in a bathroom, ostensibly from heart arrhythmia, with drug use as a probable contributing factor, was simply too hard for many fans to accept. How could the man who had revolutionized American music, who had moved his hips and changed the world, meet such an inglorious end? This type of posthumous resurrection isn't unique in popular culture, and Elvis isn't the only icon whose death has been questioned. Consider Jim Morrison of The Doors, who died suddenly at age 27 in 1971. A notable news blackout coupled with the absence of an autopsy fed suspicion and fueled tales that he might have faked his demise. Some even claimed his death was due to occult involvement, adding a mystical element to the conspiracy. Then there's Tupac Shakur, murdered in 1996, who remains a figure speculated to have faked his death. Forensic and numerological evidence allegedly support this theory, according to believers. His posthumously released album, The 7-Day Theory, under the pseudonym Machiavelli, a play on being alive, further added intrigue to claims that he had orchestrated his own disappearance. But Elvis conspiracy theories go even deeper, connecting to broader patterns that some theorists see in celebrity deaths. There's a fascinating theory that intertwines the deaths of Princess Diana, Sonny Bono, and John Denver, suggesting they all met their untimely demise within the span of a year for similar reasons. Bono was killed in a skiing accident, while Denver died in a light plane crash. Despite their distinctly different lives, Denver was known for his promotion of EST, Erhard Seminar's training, and leaned politically liberal, while Sonny Bono transitioned from pop stardom to become a Republican congressman aligned with Scientology. All three shared a common advocacy for global peace. Conspiracy theorist David Icke suggests this wasn't coincidental. Icke proposes that Diana's death, in particular, was a ritualistic sacrifice tied to ancient goddess worship symbolism. Fellow theorist Brian Desbrow emphasizes that her limousine collided with the 13th pillar within the tunnel, implying a deliberate choice due to its symbolic numerical value. These theories suggest a broader conspiracy, possibly orchestrated by the infamous Illuminati, a collection of interconnected family bloodlines manipulating world events through unconventional, secretive techniques. Princess Diana, like Elvis, held an iconic status. She was the people's princess, connecting with the public through her vulnerabilities. Her admitted battles with bulimia and depression, discontent with her royal in-laws, heartache from her husband's infidelities, and her poignant search for personal solace. Persisting rumors claimed Diana and her partner Dodi Fayed had staged their deaths, seeking peaceful anonymity away from the public eye. This is exactly the type of narrative that Elvis conspiracy theorists embrace. The idea that someone so beloved, so tormented by fame, might choose to disappear rather than continue suffering in the public eye has a romantic appeal that transcends logic. Elvis Presley has reached near-mythical status post-mortem, much like Princess Diana did in Britain. Professional impersonators keep his persona alive, and sightings of Elvis living in hiding have become part of American folklore. Some satirical religious groups, like the Presleyite Disciples, even draw parallels between Elvis and Jesus, illustrating a cultural motif that critic Greil Marcus noted had been explored since the mid-1950s, a sort of deification of the king of rock and roll. The conspiracy theories persist because they serve a psychological need. They allow fans to reject the mundane, tragic reality of a drug-addled death in a bathroom, and instead embrace the possibility that their hero outsmarted death itself. They suggest that Elvis, like the greatest performers, saved his most spectacular trick for last, making himself disappear from a world that had consumed him alive. Whether you believe Elvis died on August 16, 1977, or whether you think he's still out there somewhere, living quietly under an assumed name, one thing is certain. The king of rock and roll achieved a kind of immortality that transcends physical death. His legend, enhanced by mystery and controversy, continues to captivate new generations of fans. Elvis Presley's final days remain shrouded in mystery. Was he a victim of fame, addiction, and crushing isolation, or was something darker at play? Disappearing syringes, scrubbed medical records, and a death scene wiped clean. These aren't the signs of a peaceful passing, they're signs of a cover-up. But beyond the conspiracy lies something even more heartbreaking. A man trapped in his own legend, surrounded by people yet utterly alone. From Dr. Nick's frantic efforts to Lisa Marie's innocent confusion, behind the icon was a real person, spiraling, unheard. Did Elvis die that day in 1977? Or did he vanish into the shadows of his fame? If you're intrigued, download the Skoob app and uncover more. With more than 2,000 podcasts ranging from mystery to true crime, and from history to technology, Skoob is here to feed your curiosity for free. Download the app now from App Store and Play Store and get digging.